Dit is Kanskracht, de podcast over sociaal werk en kinderopvang. Een idee van MIK&PIW-groep. Ik ben Ruud Kleinen en vandaag praat ik met...
Professor Carmel Borg van de universiteit in Malta. Dit wordt een gesprek in het Engels. Nu doe ik dat niet op dagelijkse basis, interview in het Engels, maar we'll see where it goes.
Sure.
Professor Borg, welcome.
Yep.
You have had a busy morning.
Very busy.
Yeah, you've done a lecture here in Meersen.
Yeah.
And it's all about, opportunities. That's what it's about.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's start perhaps with a few notes about my biography.
Yeah.
I did not just parachute myself, in the Netherlands. I have a history and I have a background. So
Yeah.
I'm an academic by profession, but of course in academia there are academics and there are academics. So this morning we talked about, ethics and morality. And of course, I am proud to say that I am an ethical and engaged academic. So it's not just, a person who research, a person who writes papers and books and stays in his office, but I'm also an activist. So I'm very much, grounded with my ears on the ground, as we say in my language, and very much, close to communities, in particular suffering communities. And that's my struggle, not on behalf of struggling communities, but with struggling communities. So through these struggles, of course, I have accumulated a lot of not academic, knowledge, but experiential knowledge. And because I have lots of experiential knowledge with struggling communities, I think I have the right to come here and speak about struggling communities.
Yeah, but is this type of scientist rare?
Unfortunately, yes. Universities are not different from companies nowadays, unfortunately. So they are about profit, about dishing out products, about efficiency, about impact. And therefore, when you speak of an academic who is very much close, to struggling communities, yes, it is a rarity. And the kind of academic that I'm describing right now is not an extinct animal, but a rare animal indeed. But I've been productive as an academic for the past 30 years. So being close to communities does not mean excluding me from producing, papers, books, research, etc. These are not two mutually exclusive, ideas. So let's get now to, the subject of opportunities in the context of, struggling communities. So let's try and understand the term opportunities, because there's no one concept of opportunities. Now, for the West, the propaganda goes that the West is a land of opportunities. And I believe the Netherlands is no exception to this propaganda. This idea that, you land in the Netherlands and you suddenly are surrounded by opportunities.
Yeah.
Now, opportunities do not grow on trees, and if we believe that the West is a land of opportunities, we suddenly construct the disadvantaged other as a careless other, the other where you open the door for him and he's not interested in entering your door. The person who has very low self-esteem, who has very low expectations, not taking advantages, of, this land of opportunity, etc. So once you believe, that this is a land of opportunity, then all of a sudden, you construct the other, the disadvantaged other, as that person who is not able to take advantage of the opportunities you are offering. So basically what we're saying here, as far as the propaganda goes, the disadvantaged is to blame for his or her situation. We opened the door, we created free opportunities, supposedly to everyone, but, there are people running into their thousands who are not taking advantage of these opportunities. That's the mantra. That is the propaganda. We personalize disadvantage. It's your problem. It's you who's not taking advantage. We simply blame the victim. So that is one way of looking at the term opportunities. But there is another way, which I, of course, subscribe to. The idea that, unfortunately, disadvantage is structural. Now, this is a big word. It's a big technical word in sociology. Structural disadvantage. What does that mean? So let's take poverty, for example. At the moment, in the West, including the Netherlands, the mantra goes, look, There are lots of jobs for everyone. We are struggling to find employees. We are struggling to find workers. So if you stop there, you reinforce this idea that this country has plenty of opportunities, more opportunities than people can take. And you stop there, and you reinforce this idea. But then when you scrape the surface, you realize that this country, before COVID, had more than 300,000 people who we call as working poor. Now with COVID, and of course with the war in Ukraine, this number has exploded. In other words, people who are working now. We're not talking about the so-called parasites or bummers. These are honest, diligent people who are working, but they are struggling to survive. Okay? And I've just been informed recently that these numbers have gone up to 1.2 million, families who are struggling on a daily basis, trying to make ends meet. And this is what I mean by structural disadvantage. This is not poverty which comes out of people, not being interested in working. This is not poverty coming out of people who do not want to work, who are, as I said, parasites of the system. These are working people who want to work. Why? But, their work is paid peanuts. So they live precariously because they work precariously. So here we have a very different concept now of opportunities and disadvantage. This is not, the idea that there are opportunities out there and people are not taking them. There are opportunities, but they are not quality opportunities. In English, we call them bullshit jobs, You work and work like crazy, but you work for nothing. So when you compare what you're earning, with the inflation rate, for example, that we are living through in the West, then of course you start struggling. And when you start struggling, if we take education as an example, the last thing that comes to mind is education. So let's imagine a family which is living precariously, on the poverty line, if not below the poverty line. And of course, they do not know if they're going to eat this evening. They do not know if they're going to eat healthily this evening. They do not know if they're going to live outside or inside, under a roof. Tell me, what kind of opportunity in education would this family have in that situation? So you might say, we're creating opportunities, free education, etc., and it's their problem if not that they're not taking it. But I am telling you that opportunity is not just throwing money at the problem. It's not just opening the doors for free, but creating a situation where people can live decently so that they can then think, about education. So in the Netherlands, we know for sure statistically, so this is the objective truth, that the difference, for example, between children of privileged people and children of underprivileged people in the first 3 years, for example, because of these issues of poverty, linguistically is already 1 year difference. So children enter kindergarten not, on the same line in terms of opportunity, but obviously on different lines. So we're starting a race, if you want to call it a race, distant already, from each other very early in the child's life. So you think that you're creating opportunities by opening universal kindergarten, for example, but people are entering the door from a different, situation. As I said, pan-European research showing that linguistically already 1 year disadvantage in the first 3 years. So opportunity is much more complex than simply throwing money at the problem or, of course, providing free, for example, education to all. That is already a very important step. But opportunity is much more than that. So when we think of structural disadvantage, suddenly the problem of disadvantage is not just the person's, problem, but it's our problem. We are, collectively responsible for this problem, for this challenge, for this, disadvantage, for this inequality in terms of opportunity. So that was one reflection, that we had this morning, so to speak. A, what exactly are we talking about when we speak of opportunity? And B, how do we construct disadvantage?
Yeah.
If we're going to construct disadvantage as something, belonging to me personally, then my relationship is going to be, very different than, engaging with you from a position where I am at least partially responsible for your disadvantage. So the dynamics change in our relationships as a result of how we look at the other, of how we construct the other, of how we look at the challenge, at the problem, at the situation. So there's nothing neutral in the way we look at the other. There's nothing innocent in the way we interact with the other. The dynamic is neither innocent, nor neutral. Our relationship is fashioned by the way we look at each other, by our intellectual preparation, by the way we have, studied society. So if we think that all the problems in the world are personal in nature, then of course, in our relationship as professional and the individual, we always think in terms of the other as either the patient or the client. So my proposal this morning is, that is not a productive relationship. We are two human beings, and there is a way we can interact together productively and dialogically in the best interest of both of us.
Mm-hmm. So self-esteem actually is the thing here.
Yes, but of course, self-esteem is not something which is completely self. Self-esteem is developing in a context, and that context can enable you, can beef up your self-esteem, but it can also destroy you. Mm-hmm. So we need professionals who are working out there with all kinds of people perceived as disadvantaged, knowing that their behavior, their attitude, the way they are looking at the other can destroy, the other person, irrespective of the fact of your good intentions. So I really emphasize this morning on the importance of intellectual preparation. What we did together so far in the few minutes we've been together is intellectual work. So professionals cannot rely simply on doing. So I go to seminars, for example, where people start getting restless when we emphasize the intellectual part before perhaps we go into the doing part. Because we have a culture of doing. We have a culture of fixing people, the Verstappen, syndrome, where he goes into the pit stop and in 6 seconds, all the wheels are changed. That idea, the McDonaldization of society, the quick fix, the quick meal. When we talk about disadvantage, we cannot think about quick fixes because we have to work with people, and in working with people, that takes a lot of time. So we're talking about slow cooking here and not the fast food, syndrome. So yes, it is about building self-esteem, but we cannot say that self-esteem is completely self. The self is developing, in a context. And that context, as I said, can be liberating as much as it can be, colonizing, as much as it can be domesticating, as much as it being oppressive. So there is an ethical decision that we have to take. So the third point that we made this morning is the issue of ethics. These choices are not simply, professional choices, are not simply technical choices, but they are essentially, moral and ethical choices. The way we want to see the other, the way we want to view the other, the way we want to construct the other, it's not simply a technical, decision. It's a moral decision. Because it will definitely impact on the way we're going to work as professionals. So professional work does not start at the clinic, does not start at the center. It starts way ahead, by engaging in ongoing reflection on what we are doing with other people, on why we are here, what is our role as professional. So there is a very, very important, moment in our life where we have to stop and think and reflect and engage critically with ourselves and with our community of professionals. If we do not do that and we stop at the level of doing, keeping ourselves busy, then I think we are an impoverished profession. Mm-hmm. Because in order to do things properly, in order to do things transformatively, we have to weld, action, our professional work, with ongoing reflection. If you leave, reflection outside your professional realm, then basically what you are a doer, you are a technician, and not, a real professional. Because a real professional is an intellectual, as well as a technical person. And these two elements have to work together in a dialogue with each other. If you miss on one of them, then you're not a complete, in my view at least, you're not a complete professional.
Yeah. So when this professional gets educated, that's where the work has to be done.
Absolutely.
A different view of educating those people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm totally in agreement with you. And unfortunately, because of my international work, I have to say that most of the time, this element of critical engagement with what we're doing is very missing. So we are not forming our prospective professionals into intellectuals. Most of the time, what I see in front of me are technicians and not complete professionals. So we have to reclaim, critical reflection, which has to be ongoing. It's not just one lecture here and there, but ongoing reflection has to be ingrained in the culture of the institution, promoted in the culture of institution. So people have to stop on a regular basis and not just once in a while when an academic, comes into the institution to give a lecture.
Yeah.
So yes, there cannot be any real transformation unless critical reflection is welded intimately, with action. So action has to be informed all the time, ongoingly, with this critical engagement with what we're doing, Yeah. So that was the fourth, point. The fifth point was a different vision, for an institution which wants to work productively with the so-called, disadvantaged people. So we critiqued the concept of, this vertical relationship first. That has to go. This idea that I am the expert, I am the know-it-all, I am the only source, of information, I am the only hope. So you sit down passively and listen to what we have to say. This idea of, diagnosis and prescription of drugs, this medical model, that has to stop. So my vision, alternative vision, and by the way, as I said, that's why I introduced myself as an activist. These are things which are happening. It's not up there in utopia. It's not up there in the clouds. These are things which I am living through concretely. And that explains my passion about it, because I know that these things work with the right people, with the right attitude, with the right intellect, with the right formation and information. So my idea is, to go from this expert model into a transformative model, which I refer to as transformative learning communities. Now, these transformative learning communities start with the everyday life, not of the expert, but of course, the people who are either in need or so-called disadvantaged or falling behind or on the margins, etc. So they dictate the agenda. The agenda is not dictated by the professional. Because when the agenda is dictated by the professional, it's about assumptions. I am assuming that you are in need. I am assuming that your needs are A, B, S, C. It's all built on assumptions. Whilst when you're starting a community with, the people so-called in need, then the real needs can be indicated not by the professional, but by the people themselves. So this is the starting point. The professional shuts his mouth and listens to what the people have to say. Because most probably what I have in mind is very different from what people, have in mind. I'm most probably, as a professional, I'm a privileged, person. So I cannot understand pain unless I listen to people, expressing their pain. So the first thing that a professional has to do within these learning communities is basically listen more rather than speak more. And by listening, of course, he can then or she can then understand, what the real needs are. And therefore, the community builds on the real needs, the real daily needs of people in need. So that is a very important shift from, professionals speaking into professionals, listening. And the agenda then is dictated by the real people. Those people who are really in need, those people who can articulate well what their real needs are. And that's where the dialogue starts. So going from a vertical relationship, which is transmissive, you transmit the knowledge as the expert to the other, to, a mutual relationship built pedagogically on dialogue. Now, dialogue does not mean that you give up your role as a professional. I'm not saying that. Otherwise, it will be a laissez-faire, chat, like a talk show, on TV. It's not that way. So you're not giving up your, professional role, The difference is that, you are humble enough, to listen, to interact, and to dialogue, and to open yourself also to transformation. So when you enter into a genuine dialogue, you're saying to yourself, I am also opening myself to change. I am a different person because of the thousands of engagements and dialogues I've had with all kinds of people. So I know that through these dialogues, I'm a much better person. So you see the other now in this dialogue, not as a disadvantaged other, as a vulnerable other, but as a person, as a human being with lots of potential to teach you. So in a real dialogue, you are the educator, but also you are the student. And the other way around, the community that you're working with is a student of yours, but it's also a teacher of yours. So the relationship is mutual, and it's built on real needs, which are identified not by the expert, but basically by the community. And this is what I mean by a transformative learning community. It's learning because we are learning together. It's transformative because all this engagement, all these reflections will eventually lead to some kind of action. So these are not, chatter spaces for people to, spend an hour together. These are real transformative spaces where people are engaging together with the professional in a critical understanding of what is happening to them as people struggling on a daily basis. But then comes some kind of action. Now with me, who has been engaged in these kind of communities, it could be action at the level of council, at the level of community, at the level of government. This morning I mentioned one example of such community, and this is the community of women who have been, domestically violated. And it all started by a woman, her pseudonym is Maria, who knocked on my door, heavily bruised, with a long history of psychological, violence, physical violence, sexual violence, etc. Now, imagine yourself faced by this woman. For me, there are two ways of, reacting. One way is to see this woman, Maria, as a vulnerable person, and therefore sending her to some kind of fixing, to a psychologist, to a psychiatrist, etc. The other way, which was my way, is to see a lot of power in this person. As I said, this person was coming to me with a history of violence, broken, literally, physically, sexually, psychologically, etc., etc. But I still saw power in this woman. I still saw in this woman a need to keep on living despite, the violence she has endured. Now, my reaction and my understanding of the situation did not just come like that. It is, long hours, long days, long years of training of how to see even the disadvantaged other. The other who is in its lowest level, of her situation. Now, from then on, Maria moved on to join an organization in my, of course, country. And this organization is not run by experts. It's run by former victims of domestic violence. And this organization organizes, conferences, organizes, lessons in schools, organizes research, organizes advocacy, and they've managed to change legislation as far as domestic violence is concerned. So this is a story of what I mean by engaging productively rather than vertically with the so-called disadvantaged other. So we went from a story of a broken Maria to another story where Maria is part of an organization, not run by experts, I repeat, but by victims, of violence. So Maria and others found this space where people do not conceive, victims of domestic violence as vulnerable others, but as others with lots of potential. So much so that they have taken the reins in their hands and created this organization, not only to organize help for other women and men victims of domestic violence, but to organize educational programs, to organize conferences, to organize research. Imagine, from a broken woman to a researcher, the empowerment. Now let's talk about empowerment. Oftentimes we hear this language, let's empower people. You cannot empower people. You will never empower people. Empowerment comes with experience. Empowerment comes with action. Maria was empowered because she found a space, a hopeful space where she can grow. So nobody gave her any power or empowerment. She grew as an empowered person thanks to this safe space, thanks to this empowering space, thanks to this resourceful space, hopeful space, where people understood life the way I'm understanding it, that despite the difficulties that many people are facing, they still have lots of potential innate in them, and we only have to provide, the space for them, to grow. And that's what I mean by, transformative learning communities. They are communities because they do not base on individualism, they base on the collective, they work together. Learning because, of course, we are learning through experience, and that applies not only to the service users, but to the service suppliers, the experts. And transformative because, of course, it's not just about talking, it's about acting, but, of course, acting informed by the critical engagement with the world.
Yeah, Maria, she knocks your door.
Yeah.
It needs a lot of experience to start this conversation the right way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not just experience. It's not just the number of years involved, in one's profession. It's the kind of formation that we spoke about. It's the kind of training. It's the kind of attitude. It's the kind of intellectual ongoing formation that you get not only as a beginner in the profession, but also as, a seasoned professional. So yes, my reaction was an informed, reaction, was a trained reaction, was an intellectual reaction before it was technical. So I had two choices, and I'm sure you understand, that there were two choices, either to send her off to professionals, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, the psychotherapist, etc., to fix her, or engage with her productively in a dialogical way. Mm-hmm. So I went for the second alternative, not innocently, not casually, not because something happened to me, but because I'm trained, I'm formed to think and to engage with others in that way. So yes, I do agree with you when you asserted that formation is very, very important. And unfortunately, from my international experience, that kind of formation is, in general, I'm generalizing, in general, very missing.
But this first engagement is a critical one.
It is absolutely critical. I think Maria would have gone to a totally different, life route had I gone to the first solution, sending here and there, So yes, it was very critical, and it is a perfect example how a professional can make or break, the other, the way he or she views the other in that very important moment where he or she as a professional meets the so-called vulnerable other.
Yeah. It's kind of a crusade you're on, Professor Borg.
It looks like a crusade, yeah. I mean, as you can see, I'm very passionate about it.
You are.
Because, of course, life for me wasn't easy. As I said this morning, I was not born with the silver spoon, in my mouth. I had to struggle every single, step in my life. So I know what it means, to be working alone, to be working against, the grain, etc. So my struggle is not just an intellectual struggle as an academic, but it's a very, emotional struggle.
Yeah, it's a personal.
Yes. So
subject,
my engagement with the other is not simply on the intellectual plane, but it's also very emotional.
Yeah. And over the years, do you manage to tell your story on more places every year?
Yes. Now, obviously, there are two ways of telling your story. There is the permanent way. So I have changed my course programs to make sure that my students in academia, do get this kind of formation where they stop talking about the poor, but they are now meeting the poor, they are smelling the poor, they are seeing the poor, they are tasting the poor. So they have close encounters with poor parents and poor people, because most of the time these are students who are coming from, a very privileged background. So the first step is always deprivileging the student, helping him or her to come to terms with their privileges, because you cannot enter a disadvantaged space with all your privileges, because they will color, they will fashion, they will mold the way you look at the disadvantaged other. So that is an opportunity for me to permanently form people. But then, of course, I go around and try to touch people in an hour.
Yeah.
You can only do so much in an hour, but I think, and this is concrete experience, I do manage to touch people here and there on an individual basis, because to change an organization, you need time, and you need to be there with the organization to change qualitatively its culture.
Now, Professor, you did your lecture this morning. Did it actually land? What are your thoughts about it?
The first question that I think the chairperson asked to the rest of the group, okay, what's your takeaway from this, And people spoke. And I really liked one or two interventions where they said, okay, thank you, Professor Borg, because you've basically validated what I'm doing. So there are lots of good practice out there, which is being done on, individually. We don't know about it. People almost fear to speak about it, And listening to me, they said, I think I am on the right track as far as attitudes, as far as values, as far as action is concerned. So that was to my satisfaction, for two people to speak that, yes. I was not only impressed, but I realized that, some of the, arguments that you've brought up, some of the experiences that you shared are my experiences. Mm-hmm. This is me in your session.
Yeah.
Of course, others spoke about, institutional limitations. And that is another issue, perhaps, that we need to talk about. Institutions do impose, limitations. We're not working in a vacuum. And I always bring the example of my institution, which is academia. And if there is an institution which, tries to control its people to a certain extent, it's academia nowadays. You have to prepare course programs, you have to prepare outcomes for these course programs, etc., etc., etc. So my approach has always been, officially, this is the program. But then, because of my values, we see what students want to do, where they're coming from, what their needs are, and obviously I adjust accordingly. So there are two programs. Mm-hmm. The official one, which would normally please the institution because they need the course program almost 2 years in advance, and the real program based on the real needs, on the real situations of my students. Because you cannot speak of inclusion and you prepare, a program 2 years in advance, not knowing who, your people are, the people you interact are. That would have been a contradiction. Yeah. So yes, I give the institution what it wants, but then of course there is an element of resistance. You cannot be a transformative professional unless you're prepared to resist. You need a lot of courage to be different. And as you said, my proposal, my vision is not mainstream. So I have to resist most of the time mainstream institutions.
Yeah.
But I've learned to resist. I've learned to make an argument for my resistance. And that explains why you have to be solid intellectually. If you're not solid intellectually, you're basically a straw person, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you just, overrun, by the institution, by developments, by the restrictions imposed by society and the institution. So going against the grain is a courageous stance. Resisting is a courageous stance. So you have to be solid intellectually, bold, and very courageous to do that.
Now, the beautiful thing is for me, I'm coming in here, sit down with you, have this conversation. When you peel off all the professional and scientific layers, actually it's all about the way you see the world and you see your own place in it.
Yes.
It's kind of a philosophical thing.
It is. And as you said, the moment you describe it as philosophical, it's the moment where you go into the intellectual realm. As I said earlier, there's nothing innocent. The way you see, we can, sit down, look through the window and see things differently. Objectively, they are the same, but subjectively, we see them differently. And that is a function of our intellectual preparation, and that's a function of our context, because context do teach us, a lot of lessons. If you're living in a privileged context, then, of course, you see the world very differently from a person who has to struggle, on a daily basis. So it's a question of context, and it's a question of intellectual preparation. So yes, seeing the world is very subjective. I would dare say it's ideological, okay? But definitely it's not innocent, and definitely it's not neutral. So my call to my students, to my professionals is, okay, which side of the river are you on? So whoever is training or forming with me cannot leave, my lecture hall feeling that he or she is neutral. They have to take up a position. Because when we're dealing with the other, we're dealing with the other in an ethical way. And ethics is about, decisions. Ethics is about choices. We mentioned the story of Maria. Short moment, huge ethical decisions that I had to take. So yes, definitely. I mean, there is an objective, perhaps, truth out there, but the way we see that truth or that reality is very subjective. And it depends on, as I said, the intersection of, our intellectual preparation, but also on the context we're living in. And most of the time, at least the professionals I work with are coming from very privileged, backgrounds. So they see the world differently. And my question is, how can you engage productively with the disadvantaged other when you are so privileged and you never ask questions about, your privilege?
Professor Borg, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Dit was Kanskracht, de podcast over sociaal werk en kinderopvang. Een idee van MIK&PIW-groep. Reageren en jezelf aanmelden als gast? Dat kan. Je vindt een contactformulier in de show notes. Vergeet Kanskracht niet te volgen in je podcast-app. En als je daar toch bent, geef een recensie.